Hello everybody, it's Mr. Everett. I am recording a video lecture for you on the Middle Colonies. Actually, the PowerPoint that I'm using is called the Restoration Colonies, but I added "or the Middle Colonies" with the Carolinas and Georgia thrown in. So as I go through each of the colonies, each colony will have a slide with a little visual clue for you, if you can draw the logical connection between the image in the photo and the notes that we are going over. So let's start by just reviewing some very important facts about the middle colonies, okay, before I actually go into the PowerPoint. Okay, first, these middle colonies are New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. And in the colonial days, they made up the breadbasket economy for growing the most food in the 13 colonies. They were also profoundly marked by three really important rivers: the Susquehanna River, the Delaware River, and the Hudson River. These colonies themselves were less aristocratic than New England and the southern colonies, with the small exception of New York. The land holdings that people had were relatively small in size, but they weren't like large plantations, and they weren't as small as some of the farming communities of New England. They had fewer industries than New England. They had a lot more than the South. Okay, there was some shipbuilding and lumbering, but predominantly commerce becomes the main driving force of economic development in these colonies. And the population is more ethnically mixed in these colonies of New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey than any of the others. And that also creates some conflict and factions between different groups. But we'll come to that in a little bit. So we're going to start with, of course, the biggest colony of these four at the time, and that is New York. So here is your visual clue. And let's go on to take a look at some of the information on the colony of New York. Well, originally, okay, when we take a look at these colonies, we have the Jamestown settlement down here in Virginia. Maryland is relatively small. And we have the Massachusetts Bay Colony, as well as the Plymouth Colony, Rhode Island, and Connecticut and New Haven. One important factor to note, though, in these new middle colonies is, look at this. We have non-English people moving in to this area, specifically around the port of New Amsterdam and the New Netherlands, and this Bay Area as well. So let's talk about how these actually develop. So you're probably wondering, what are the Dutch even doing here? Well, it turns out that the Netherlands was actually experiencing an enormous boom in the early 1600s as far as sea power was concerned. They challenged England on the seas, and they fought three major wars against England. And overall, they developed one of the largest commercial fleets in the world. In fact, the Dutch East India Company becomes one of the largest naval forces in the world, and it's a private company. It's not even run by the Dutch Navy. So they also establish colonies in different parts of the world, specifically in the East Indies. Okay, so eventually they also put a foothold in the New World. So to counter this, we have Henry Hudson, who was an Englishman employed by the Dutch East India Company. He explored for them and sailed into this area in the early 1600s. In 1609, he traveled up the Hudson River, and that made a profound impact on him and the region. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as American history goes on, but rivers play an especially important role in not just developing an economy, because it's easier to move goods down a river to a seaport and then off across oceans, But rivers also, like the early river civilizations of ancient Babylon, they help transmit ideas. They bring diverse people together, and they form the basis of rich cities. And we'll see this take place in New York as well. So this company called the Dutch West India Company actually establishes a colony in the New World, and they do this based on some of the findings of Henry Hudson. So they go into this Hudson River Valley area, and they establish a foothold. What they do is they purchase land from the Native Americans in kind of like a shady deal. Some of you have probably heard about this, that they offered about $30 for the island of Manhattan. Well, it turns out that the Native Americans who actually took the $30 weren't the ones who actually owned or claimed that territory in the first place. So both sides thought they got a deal off of the other. So what happens is they establish this colony, and they start bringing people over. They run a company town. This is not a national organization. It's not funded by the Dutch government at first. They do not support democracy. They do not support the idea of free speech or religious toleration. The governors are appointed by the company, and even though they deal with local assemblies, they actually run it as a private corporation. Eventually the people begin to complain about that, and as a result they establish some local representative bodies. But we're talking about a place that in the 1640s had people coming to it from literally all over Europe and the rest of the world. By the mid-1640s there were over 18 different languages spoken in this region. And there's an effort made by the Dutch to actually bring people over, and they begin to grant what they call patroonships, which are big, huge estates that are granted to people if they are able to bring over 50 settlers or more and pay their passage. Some of these patroonships are a little bit ridiculous. One of them near Albany over here is actually larger than the entire colony of Rhode Island, which seems, again, kind of farcical. But again, this was the New World, and so there was many incentives for land ownership to be a great incentive for creating wealth. Okay, we see that the New Netherlands is established by this early period of 1613. Later, there is a formation of another colony in southern, what we would know as New Jersey. It's called New Sweden. By 1638, they have established a small presence there. There are also Swedes in New Netherlands. In fact, by 1655, the Dutch, under the leader Peter Stuyvesant, attacks New Sweden, and their main fort falls, and they are able to take over here. It's kind of interesting because, you know, although the English were the first to establish an Atlantic sea presence on the eastern coast of the United States, others are beginning to muscle their way in. And this idea of Peter Stuyvesant kind of attacking New Sweden was, you know, an effort by them to secure their holdings in New Netherlands and try and militarily claim more. Competition. So the British begin to move in, and they begin with Charles II, who after the English Civil War begins to establish a stronger English presence in this area, and particularly he wants the Dutch out. So by 1664, English soldiers arrive, and the Dutch surrender, which was probably a good idea, seeing how if there were strong commercial interests and a lot of money invested in this seaport, it would probably make more sense for them not to contest the English, to retain their mercantile presence in the region and continue to make some more money. So the territory was renamed New York, and And then it became the colony that we know of as one of the most commercially successful for the English. Okay, here is the Duke of York's original charter, and as you can see, the New York charter begins to infringe a bit on Massachusetts and Connecticut. And the areas in green that you can see are still some of those large patroonships or land holdings. Again, this is meant to absorb some of the details and the presence of the Dutch in the area by laying more military control over it. And notice how far inland they go. This is also a characteristic of the English once they take over New York, because business really does prosper after they move in. And partly that's because they make a deal with the Iroquois tribe to trade with them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So here's a painting of New Amsterdam. You can see the ships coming in and doing business. Here's a portrayal of a very wooden-looking family. They look almost like robots, but they are an aristocratic family in this area during this time in the Hudson River Valley. Some coins of New York from the early 1700s and 1800s. I'm sorry, 16 and 1700s. So, you know, there are a couple different examples of Dutch culture still in the New York region, specifically in the names. Harlem and Brooklyn are both Dutch names, as well as Roosevelt, which we'll know later as the name of two presidents who trace their roots back to this Dutch presence in the area. The gambrel roof that you see here in this picture is an example of Dutch culture, as well as Easter eggs, Santa Claus, waffles, bowling, sleighing, skating, and, of course, golf. So, all of those are examples of this. Now, we move on to our second colony, Pennsylvania. Here is your visual clue. See if you can determine its logical connection to the notes. All right, moving on. We have the Quakers. So, the Quakers are a predominantly religious group that have a separate belief system. We've talked about them in class. They refused to pay taxes to support the Church of England. They did not have paid clergy. They believed that all people were children of God. And there were a couple other practices. We've talked about them, that they would not take oaths. They spoke to people with the words thee and thou. In their common everyday language. How much would thee like to pay for the loaf of bread? I don't think I actually said that right, but I think you get the idea. They are diehard pacifists, okay? And there are a couple other important characteristics. Here is an example of a Quaker meeting, a friend's meeting. It all begins with William Penn. He is an aristocratic Englishman. He and his father have a great deal of land in England. He was attracted to the Quaker faith. He receives in 1681 a grant from the king to establish a colony. So partly this is a payoff of a debt that the king owed William Penn's father. So they named it Pennsylvania with the Latin root of woodland. And he basically sent out agents to try and recruit people to settle there. And again, as the PowerPoint states, he was pretty honest in it. This is one of the first efforts to try and recruit people to come to the New World from the point of view of just setting down land and policies. So yes, William Penn did stand to make a great deal of money from the sale of land, but the policies that he helped establish here were predominantly different from the commercial interests in Virginia with the Joint Stock Company, or with the religious interests that were set up with Puritans who had believed that they wanted to establish a new shining city on a hill. So here's a picture of the Royal Land Grant. We actually have the original document. The people who settled in this area borrowed some of the practices of Roger Williams. They did not want to upset Native Americans. And I'm going to actually pause here and we'll pick this up in part 2 of your video lecture. See you in a few seconds.